Chapter 196. Ignacio had left him with a knife. Soren wasn't sure if it was to protect him or to keep him company while he waited here, flat on the floor, snugged between his tube-shaped sandbag and the barrier. Maybe when a person had several dozen knives on them they started to feel more like stickers or pieces of chewing gum than weapons. A friend is sad, bored. Offer them one of your sharp things to brighten their day. It was one of his nicer knives, too. Or one of his nicer-looking ones anyway. Ignacio's gym supply was mostly made up of knives he didn't mind ruining, so they tended to be battered. This one had a long double-edged blade polished to a mirror finish. Soren tilted it and noticed the way the light bounced off to shine on the rough fabric of the sandbag. A piece of shiny metal is a better shaper than I am. That was an exaggeration and a pointless thought. More important things were happening. Soren angled the blade so that he could see some of the fighters reflected in it as they closed in on Instructor Klein. Amazing. They look amazing. And it would have been completely unmanageable to be there in the middle of them. Figuring out where Finley and Fabry were moving would be impossible, and that was only two of the people involved. What if they do it? What if we actually make it to the end today? I could get some help from. The feeling of his sandbag being dragged away from him startled him so much that he gasped and sprang into a crouch, knife held up to defend himself. You can come with me now, Winston Feather said, looking down on him through mirrored lenses. I'll take you across with my team. He was hefting Soren's sandbag onto his own shoulders. What? Soren lowered the knife because Winston was talking like he was completely confident he had Soren's cooperation for some obvious plan. Soren wondered if he'd missed a sudden problem that made a team switch-up necessary or if a message had come that he hadn't noticed. And then Winston said, I'll be taking this in any case, to protect my team. Come with us if you want. It's better for you than waiting around and better for the S's if they don't have to take care of you. Don't say I didn't give you a fair chance. Soren's mouth fell open. He started to realize what was going on even though he didn't understand why it was going on. But before he could form an argument or lunge forward, the speedster was spinning and taking off. As Soren accepted the reality of his situation in the next blink, his thoughts went from tumbling confusion to rising fear and fury. My sandbag. Why? His team's running ahead? He was supposed to be helping. The plan. My teammates. What happens when the wind starts? I have a knife. He was running after Winston Feather. He was throwing the knife like it was a ball because he had no idea how to throw a knife. It sailed past Winston's left ear. Soren was losing ground. That tended to happen when you chased after speed brutes, but I can't let them all down and ruin this last run because I couldn't even protect a bag of sand. He tried to run faster and couldn't. He looked around for something else to throw, and there was nothing. The knife was shining on the floor, too far away for Soren to pick it up, but so bright that it looked like he ought to be able to in another way. Fine, he thought, pointing at it. Fine. He jabbed his other index finger at a glinting piece of debris in a distant pile. He started to glow. I don't care how useless it is or how stupid I look doing it. I don't care if all I manage is making him sparkle. By the time the wind hits, I'm going to use every last bit of magic the system gave me. If he sparkles bright enough, maybe it'll distract him so I can kick him in his stupid face. Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. If you happen to see Soren trying to shape, give him a little time to finish the job, Torsten advised the volunteers in the classroom. He's having difficulty grasping his powers, and since his results have been so lackluster, he rarely musters the confidence to use anything but his fists in actual combat. I've spoken with him about it. I told him that even if he only warms up the enemy's feet, he still ought to try to get them warmer than he did the last time. I hope that was the right thing. He's agreed to work on it, but I expect him to be especially reluctant today because of the team component. The pressure of our last team challenge was a little too much for him, and he worries about bothering the other students. He looked like he wanted to say more, but he only glanced once again at Soren's wanted poster, sighed, and moved to the last one on the list. And finally, This is our first rabbit student in the talent development program. Alden Thorne. Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. All class. Instructor Waker had been practicing his pitching from a fixed position at the far end of the gym, by the finish line. He had only dashed around or jumped up into the air a few times to change the angle of his throws. Alden had been more focused on when the strikes would be coming than where exactly they'd come from, but he thought Big Snake usually changed up his style when the people he wanted to hit were glued to another team. One strategy for dealing with the shock traps was to follow in the footsteps of others and hope they ran into them all for you, and Big Snake obviously didn't consider it fair sportsmanship to hit his targets by sending one of his projectiles through a team enjoying a reprieve from his attacks. So he moved when he needed to. He was moving now, preparing to bounce into the air on legs that could kick down trees when the man was in the mood for some casual wood carving. Why isn't he classified as a hyperbole already? The question flashed through Alden's mind as one of his feet hit his own personal ground patch and launched him forward and upward. Before he could think through whether he should protect the teammate he guessed the giant dog crate might be aimed at, his body had already committed him to trying it. Hoyu, Lexi, and Con were all possibilities since they were either moving forward or attacking. Con was the most vulnerable one, so Alden was headed toward him. And toward the battle. His stomach clenched as something that was probably one of Tyed's darts whizzed past his neck. Marcia was swinging. Astrid was stiff as a board on the floor. Torsten Klein seemed to be everywhere. Alden landed hard. He didn't hurt himself, and his balance was good. But he didn't have time to be pleased that his practices with Bobby and his word chain were paying off. He really wasn't that far from where he'd just been crouching with Everly, but he'd jumped into a riot of flying bodies, spells, and weapons that was worse than he'd expected. The plan for corpse duty had been to run in and rescue the first person to fall near the perimeter of the fight, but now that he was here, he realized there was no perimeter to speak of. Con, moving to get beside Lexi, had looked as though he was near the edge of it. At the moment, though, Alden was just a step or two away from him, and there wasn't anything like an edge here. Either the battlefield had expanded in the time it took him to jump to this spot, or it was a different, even less comprehensible place once you were inside it. Yelling in a couple of languages, popping sounds, a brief whoosh of wind so hard he staggered, knives over his head. And the agility brutes were the worst as far as visual confusion went. Finley was fast, but his feet stayed mostly on the floor. Fabry and Mehdi were behaving like popcorn kernels, exploding and flying off in random directions in response to the heat of battle. This is 100% not where I need to be. This is too central to Dog Crate. It was coming in hard from above, launched by Big Snake from high up and far away, but still accurate. It was going right toward the brothers, so Alden was already moving again, leaping with his shield up, feeling a swell of energy as he realized he'd gotten the timing right and he was going to intercept the crate perfectly. And then Fabry was crashing into the metal cage from the side and wrapping his arms around it. He used instant corners to redirect his own body, and the next thing Alden knew, the dog crate he'd come to save Con from was flying toward Klein, who was no longer in the way when it arrived, of course. It slammed into the floor meters away, and Jeffrey fell over it. He wasn't even supposed to be a part of his fight. He just hadn't managed to clear out from being on the bait team yet. Or he didn't want to clear out. Alden, you came to save us. You're both supposed to be over there with Everly. You're supposed to be whipping Klein, not waving Rather around like a broom handle you don't know how to use. Hit him. Hit him. Shut up. That piece of bicycle you threw landed closer to New Zealand than to the enemy. Both of you get lost or get behind me. The Roberts brothers were talking so fast Alden mostly got the impression of Con being enthusiastic and Lexi being stressed rather than the words. Behind me. Lexi shouted again. There was no real behind him, though. Not if he meant that Alden and Con should position themselves so that he was closer to the danger than they were. The danger was coming from every direction. Alden would need to spin like a top to keep Instructor Klein in view, and that was assuming he didn't try to dodge anything else going on out here. Grab and go. That's all I can do. Grab someone and go. His eyes skimmed for problems. Heloisa was crawling aggressively, too far away. Astrid was just lying there like a statue, clearly stiff-suited. Finley was shouting and falling as he took one of Masha's slashes to the lower body. It was impossible to tell whose fault it was. She might have aimed without considering him, or he might have just zipped right into the path of it. The speed brute's body slid and rolled across the floor toward Alden and the brothers like he'd been thrown from a car on the freeway. God, that looks horrible. Con, we grab Finley and go, he said. Then he ran for the speedster. He was breathing hard. He didn't know which way to point his shield. There were actually a lot of factors in getting that right if multiple types of threat were coming his way, and he couldn't sort it all. The overwhelming pace of the violence was making this different from a typical moment in class. He felt like he needed to zero in on something, and apparently it was going to be the person he'd just seen take a serious injury. His thoughts were jumbled, but the jumble was pointing in the direction. Grab Finley. Maybe hurl him toward the starting line. He might even make it back in time to help once his suit gets duck. He didn't even know who he was ducking under. Some airborne figure that would have taken his head off if he hadn't. Things were impacting his shield. Wind. A bicycle bell. A metal shard. That's fine. Debris is fine. I'm not too tired to protect the shield from that. I'll carry him. Con yelled, lunging ahead of Alden to grab the Scottish boy. Go for the start. Okay, Con's with me. Finley's in his arms. Gotta keep Con from taking a bad hit. If Con got safely away with Finley, that was two saved. If Con got away, that was one more teammate outside this mess to make sure they didn't get completely wiped. Where's the way out? Only seconds had passed since he'd landed in the midst of this melee, and even though he couldn't possibly see what was happening with everyone, he had a sense that something about the fight was going badly for his side of it. It was everything, all together, looking not quite right from moment to moment. He spotted a girl with silver hair, closer than he'd expected her to be, turning to run back to Hoyu and the starting line as a fragment of washing machine raced past her. Everly? Why? She was supposed to be out of the way. The fight had sprawled outward to reach her. That's what's bad. Space isn't something we wanted Klein to have, but he's managing to make it for himself by spreading us out. It was only a brief realization as he tried to cover Con's retreat, nothing he could act on. Galacourse had to be close to finishing her lap. And the good guys had to be close to losing this bold play. Alden was approaching another realization, that dropping his shield to save his skill for their final attempt at the finish was probably the right decision, since he'd just seen Hoyu in a position of relative safety and Everly was still on her feet. Before he could make that call, though, he stopped dead at the sight of the dog crate again. It was barely dented even though it had come from the trash pile and been tossed by two S-ranks in rapid succession. And it was now in one of Torsten Klein's hands. He'd just landed on the floor a few meters away. His eyes were pointed in Alden's direction. Con had stopped beside Alden. Finley's breath was on the back of his hand. Whatever decision he'd been about to make about the shield vanished from his thoughts. The sight of Klein standing before him dug into him and triggered actual fear in a way that MPE Danger almost never did. The instructor tended to wear a slight smile when they were going after him hard during their Catch Klein sessions. He wasn't smiling at the moment. One of his legs was stiff, one of his hands didn't work, he was bent slightly in a way that suggested an injury Alden couldn't identify. And none of it made him look weaker. Mehdi and Fabry came in from either side of him, in an attack that had to have been coordinated by at least one of them. Shrike's knife and its followers were crossing just over their heads. Alden's stomach clenched as the crate swung and knocked Fabry out of the air. Mehdi was on the instructor for the briefest of instants, and then he was being slammed to the floor at the man's feet. Klein's eyes hadn't turned to see either of them. They were fixed on Alden like cold steel. Alden had exercised his imagination a lot today. He'd spent this afternoon at North of North and this evening here in class, asking himself what he would do if certain attacks had come from a Bakov. What if the enemy had the power to damage the car? What would he do if it aimed itself at Kibby? Right now, Torsten Klein looked just a little bit like a demon. Line of asterisks. A very short while ago. Line of asterisks. Winston felt sick. He had thought that no class could ever be worse than the one where he'd been tricked into decapitating himself by his Machiavellian roommate and a disturbingly ambitious rabbit. But this one was a new low. His teammates were. No. Never mind. He had chosen to protect them, so he would. Their vocal brute couldn't aim his voice if he was nervous, and he said Winston made him nervous. Olive had too many opinions for someone who got blown away if you weren't holding on to her, and she was ineffective if you did hold her, because then it was obvious to the enemy which of her fakes were fake. Rebecca could have been really helpful since she could cover a lot of ground quickly, but she was so ticked off that Astrid had refused to team up with her that she kept glancing over there even though Winston had told her he would watch Max's team for tricks and she should watch Hoyu's parents. And Sanjay just kept saying, "Relax, dude. Relax," in an odd way that Winston was afraid was supposed to be an American accent. Winston couldn't tell if the guy was trying to bond, or if he was making fun of him. If he had to take an A-rank shaper for this run, he wished he'd gotten Jerry instead. But these people were his team. He was devoted to them like a leader, one who was not a jerk, should be. It had to be 100% obvious to everyone in the room that Winston's team was the weakest and that he was trying to do something nice here. Only nobody would give them any help. There were 3 teams with S ranks, since you couldn't count Khan. Those teams didn't need the elemental weights. And yet, they'd all taken more than one of the big ones. They'd been throwing them around, casually keeping them under their arms like pocketbooks, floating on top of them, and chopping them up. If Olive had a sandbag, Winston wouldn't have to hold her. If Rebecca had a sandbag, she could control her jumps in high winds. If Sanjay had a lithium bag, maybe he could entertain himself by talking to it, so that his leader could think about a strategy that would get this bunch of misfits safely to the end. Winston had wanted a victory so badly today. Real victory, like Feather's favorite Nike talked about in the encouraging comment he'd kept pulled up on his interface all class. Don't let the haters get you down. Let your victory be your answer. But he'd admitted after the first hour that he would settle for reaching the finish line even if it was behind the other teams. Even if a first-place run with smiling teammates patting him on the back would have been more of a moment, at this point, crossing at all was going to be momentous enough. They finally had weight they could use to move forward in the wind without just hanging on to each other. The weights were little garbage Winston had collected for them all, but they had them. He was circling the team as fast as he could, trying to keep his eyes on every enemy at once and on Max, who couldn't be trusted. He would absolutely throw a trap in front of Winston's team as soon as Winston let his guard down. So Winston was circling. He was tired. He was feeling bad about their chances and very worried about the way some people had become prejudiced against him after the drama that had been stirred up by the ARF dog incident, Everly and Finley insinuating stuff, and Alden suddenly producing a commendation that nobody had heard about before now. The annoyance in some of their voices when I pointed out that as a speedster I could have gotten to the weights before them if I hadn't taken time to help those in need. They definitely weren't treating me this way last week. His first stroke of luck outclass happened then, and he shouted for a halt. By saying, "Halt," which was more professional than using stop and go, obviously. Finley had just gunned down hard as he approached the finish. He had fallen on top of Astrid. A red line had appeared. Are they dead? They look dead. I think I know what that spell was, said Olive. Winston, get closer so we can talk. I think I know what that is. I have to keep my eyes on the enemy, said Winston. Who knows when they're going to come our way? I'm pretty sure Big Snake throws at us in 2, Sanjay started. Send me texts about the spell, Winston said. I'll stand guard. So he got a good look at Alden's broken team as they made their way back to the start and Max's. It lifted his spirits, and they were lifted even more when Olive finally texted him. Shock box? An old-school adjuster trap. Max the trap adjuster had missed a trap. It was different from the ones they'd been running into all period. Olive was saying the caster could establish various conditions for it. Finley was out in front of his team by a few steps because he always has to be first. Probably it's a trap that won't hurt you if your whole team is close enough together. After the intense post-obstacle course lecture his old team had gotten, thanks mostly to Marcia, he thought the faculty might want to make a point about togetherness and loyalty. And if that wasn't the right assumption, no single shock box could cover the whole width of the gym, according to Olive. So there might be 8 of them? One for each team. What if once you trip one, it doesn't reappear? Does that mean whoever runs through that section that Finley just activated is safe? That exciting prospect was interrupted by the arrival of a long text from Alden Thorne. After reading it, Winston wanted to roll his eyes so hard they'd disappear into the back of his own skull forever. Now they want our help, he said. Now they want everyone to be friends. When they wouldn't even give us a weight? I mean, I didn't expect them to give us anything, said Rebecca. But it has been kind of. You're carrying a radiator, said Winston. Think of how much better you'd be doing if you'd had something with handles all this time. Our lack of progress is not our fault. We might be way out ahead, we might be finished, if things had gone differently. You are doing an apex job for someone with a radiator, said Sanjay. And I've got this ladder and this hose and... Winston tuned him out and answered the text. He even offered to put the fight on his channel. It would be good for him to be seen with an elite group, and he thought they should all be grateful to him for the exposure. Not a single person replied with a thank you. Line of asterisks. The last-second decision to take his own team over the line rather than joining the attack on their instructor had good reasons behind it. Winston could feel them all coming together in his head right before he changed his mind. It was little things like the lack of thanks, Finley shooting him a look from a distance, the realization that all the S's joining in would make the sacrifices of the A's seem useless, and the fact that it was a plan Alden and Max would be taking credit for once it was over. And it was also bigger things like Winston showing loyalty to his own team and making sure they were treated fairly by their leader since the rest of the class wasn't looking out for them. Then, during the first moments when he was failing to run toward the fight and worrying about how this was going to come across to people who didn't know all the details, he had a sudden brainwave about Soren. The guy was just lying around. Again. He was basically a pet for his team, and his team had abandoned him. He had been slightly antagonistic to Winston, but now Winston could take him to the finish ahead of everyone else. Or he could offer to do it. It would be up to Soren to get over himself and accept. That would also be proof to any fans who weren't as aware of the nuances of these Anisidran machinations that Winston wasn't being selfish here. He was just thinking like a leader. Winston would help Soren. Soren's sandbag would help Winston's people with the wind and maybe even the electricity in case he was wrong about the shock box traps. Did sand block electricity? It might. So Winston took action. The story was coming back together. He could tell Feather's favorite and Iker words were in his eyes when he made up his mind to do something bold and different. Victory can be my answer when people ask me who I think I am, he thought. I can make my own moment. Seconds later, Soren was refusing the hand of salvation. So, Winston took the sandbag. He really didn't expect the crazy light shaper to start chasing him and throwing knives at him. It was so stupid, but maybe on camera, it was making Winston look like he was the bad guy instead of someone who cared about his team. What if I made a mistake? No. This is fine. It's all fine. Victory will be my answer. People loved a winner. A lot of people loved winners so much they didn't care who they were or how they won, which was why Finley was gaining followers like a cult leader. Go back. Winston yelled over his shoulder. You're way slower than me, and the wind will start soon. Soren screamed with animalistic fury. He's lost his mind. You're too weak to be out here on your own. Give up. Give up for your own good. Winston had almost reached his teammates. This was going to work. Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. Alden, Torsten said to the volunteers, who looked just a little more interested than they had a moment ago, has a noteworthy personal life, as I'm sure you all know. I can tell overstating isn't one of your bad habits. Aparna drummed her fingers on top of her student desk. We don't see many teenagers rubbing shoulders with wizards. No, Klein agreed. Hoyu loves having him as a roommate, said Hale. I like helping with Matadero Thanksgiving, said Jianwei. That should become a tradition. I have no comment on that. Torsten looked at the wanted poster. The video clip showed Alden Thorne catching tennis balls. Tempting though it might be to gossip about him, I am tempted, Aparna said. Tempting though it might be, Torsten said firmly, I'll keep us on track by talking about Alden's gym performance and special considerations related to it. He's on an impressive discovery streak with his powers right now. The timing of it might be due to his personal circumstances, but it's encouraging to see such swift progress from him anyway. The ability shown on the video here is his main skill, being used in a novel way. He places objects or people in magical stasis. The stasis is absolute while the skill is active. There appears to be no circumstance in which whatever he's protecting will change from within or take damage from without, unless the skill or the skill user fails. Keep that in mind because you won't have cues to know when he is approaching skill fatigue. It's not like some shielding spells you might have encountered that weaken before they break. We do know that he wears his skill out much faster when he tries to preserve something that extends a significant distance from his body. He's currently exploring what he can do with rope, so it's come up. He might be able to shield something on the end of a thread half a gym away, but you're unlikely to see him do it given the practical limitations and magical cost. Alden has a movement trait that won't make an appearance unless he finds the proper element to stand on. It provides him with a modest increase in the distance he's able to cover every time he propels himself off the ground. Not spectacular, but practical. If we'd had this talk a few weeks ago, the only other thing I would have been able to warn you about was his penchant for throwing his own spell ingredients at people as a distraction. Are they cheap? Torsten glanced at Aparna. He has temper spheres. They turn invisible if he uses a spell on them, but he tosses them around without bothering to cast that spell more often than not. She laughed. So not as cheap as they might be. They break less frequently than I would have expected. Thanks to the discovery streak I mentioned, there's more to say than there was. Alden is able to lift impressive amounts of weight, as long as he can get the weight secured on top of or within something he's protecting with his skill. He currently seems to be interested in learning what results he can get by accelerating and launching objects with preserved rope. He's also able to use his skill on things that are thrown to him, conserving the force of the throw. That's interesting, but it's not threatening at this point. He's limited by his ability to actually detect and catch what's coming at him. Torsten turned to the video once more. Alden also seems to be able to sense the location of objects that have been entrusted to him. This particular instance in the footage was his first time doing that, so I'm curious to see the ability develop in the future. His skill has some restrictions that are inconvenient, to say the least. To use the power at all, he has to be given something or told to take it by a targeted individual. He can only target one person at a time. If he drops the object he is preserving, he can't reactivate the stasis on it until he gets permission again. Aparna was frowning. Melanie had looked up from her notes. That's more punishing than inconvenient. I've heard of some absurd restrictions on abilities, but that seems like too much considering what the skill is. I assume it must be intended for some esoteric job on the Triplanets. We can only speculate at this point. Alden manages the skill's limitations and versatility very well from what I've seen. He's studious, and he seems to be interested in making up for his low foundation points by learning word chains. He's already started using one that makes him more sure-footed and graceful. That level of dedication is something I can appreciate as his instructor. I hope to see his work rewarded over the coming years. Given the many unknowns in his case, I have concerns about that, but for now, I look forward to seeing how he handles himself in class. Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. To Alden, at the moment, Torsten Klein looked a little like a demon. Here was something bigger than he'd expected, something dangerously altered from what it had been just minutes ago. transformed by the chaos around them. Suddenly, imagination was easier. What if it was coming for Kibby? The lights in the gym seemed to dim as if to acknowledge the question. He was still aware of where he really was, but the idea of casting aside his shield and accepting injury for the sake of team goals was gone. Klein plunged toward them, the cage held in front of him like a strange battering ram. My shield's going to break. If the instructor had thrown the cage, then it would be different. Alden could take a really hard hit from a mundane object. But Klein himself bowling through changed the outcome. A dog crate was just a dog crate. Torsten Klein was an avowed. He had the authority to move through this spot faster and harder than a normal man. And Alden had the authority to guard this, his burden, a simple mat of yellow webbing he'd made for his team's windshield. His skill was going to be exhausted in no time, just like it had been when Marcia had hit him with her magical slash in duels. What if I was on Thagund? What if I was guarding Kibby? The gym seemed to darken even more. It was all happening in a heartbeat. Alden wasn't dropping his shield. Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. You're too weak to be out here on your own. Give up. Give up for your own good. Winston Feather was shouting. He hit Soren's sandbag. I shaped the light toward me, then I shaped it away. Soren didn't know how many times he'd activated his skills. He was getting farther and farther behind this postal of a human being who was mocking him for being too slow and too weak. The gym was gaining shadows. Gallicourse had just finished her lap. She was about to ruin everything. I shaped it toward me. Who cared if light made sense? He was its shaper. It was supposed to be his. He pulled his arms in close to his chest. His hands curled in front of his heart in a gesture that felt natural because the system had given it to him when it affixed him. I shape it away. You nasty little fucker! Screamed Soren. Are you faster than light? He thrust his hands out. Winston Feather disappeared in a blaze of white. Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. The cage slammed into the shield. Metal crumpled against magic. Alden felt the clash of their powers, like he was being swept aside and denied a spot he'd tried to claim. But at the same time, there was something real here. He lasted longer than he should have, and he knew it. Refusing to move mattered, wanting to protect something mattered. He'd begun to grasp it already. There's still more for me to understand. Then the bearer of all burdens was exhausted, and Klein was charging through, straight toward the person Alden hadn't even realized he was shielding. Lexi followed us. Alden hit the floor in a heap of limp yellow webbing. Con and Finley were already down. Ruther snapped and danced through the air angrily, moving as fast as it had been earlier when it had almost seemed like it should be able to touch Torsten Klein. Now, Klein was slower. And Astrid, who had apparently been pretending to be dead all this time, was flinging herself at the instructor's last good leg. Knives were falling all around them. Good, thought Alden, taking a deep breath as a bright light filled the gym. We did pretty good. Chapter 197. While they waited for rescue and a pile of the injured and went vulnerable, Con laughed and called out to their classmates at the top of his lungs. Lexi held onto him, resigned to the assault on his eardrums until Hoyu or Everly could come. Gallicourse was sending her wind from the side to avoid helping the students who'd fallen in the attack on Instructor Klein from having a convenient ride back to the starting line on her Gus. Alden's skill was exhausted. Lexi couldn't extend or phase Ruther anymore. Class was basically over, and so were their chances of reaching the finish this evening, if they were being honest about it. But it wasn't the worst end to the school day. Among Con's bellows about Soren doing crazy things with the light, Astrid doing her part to catch their instructor by surprise, and Jupiter doing something with a tree stump to keep the adults occupied and unable to rescue their fallen comrade. There were also embarrassingly effusive praises about Ruther. He ripped through your defenses. Con yelled. That's who Lexi Roberts is. Lexi's face was hot, but he couldn't tell Con to shut up when Finley was right there with him, chanting about whips and morph brutes who rose from the dead, too. I suppose it's fine for now. A lot of people were shouting their own victory cries. You got him, Astrid. I got him, Alden. You got him, Lexi. The arm Lexi had locked around one of Con's shifted as Con tried to roll over to see what was going on in some other part of the gym. He was grinning. He always has been such a smiler. Con's smile was one of Lexi's first memories, from a time in his life so early that he didn't have much else to connect it to. He recalled waving a teddy bear in the baby's face, thinking something about how he needed to be slow and not scare Con by bumping his nose. It had been a serious effort, very careful teddy bear magic that he wanted to get right because it would be proof that he was good at taking care of his little brother. Con had smiled and reached for the bear, and even though only one of them would ever remember the moment, the contract between them had been written in Lexi's heart. That specific memory resurfaced every now and then still, usually when Con had been particularly affectionate or when he had really hurt Lexi's feelings. So here it was, rising to the surface while Con screamed about Lexi's killing blow of Klein to almost 40 other teenagers like he thought Lexi had done something much more extraordinary than just finishing off a task everyone had worked on together. Con's smile was sometimes a knife because it was impossible for Lexi not to know that they were always being compared to each other. He had heard so many people say, "You're so different from your brother." And it usually meant, "You're so much less fun." And Con's smile was often infuriating because he would use it to blow off people's concerns or hide problems he was having. Lexi had tried, now that they were both older, to have a conversation about what had happened on that visit to Moscow when they were kids. A serious conversation, all the things he'd never said about that night. Con had smiled and laughed it off, and Lexi was still mad about it. But the smile also renewed the contract. "The party is at Lexi's apartment tonight," Con shouted. "It's really clean, and they have a polar, oh." Lexi had punched him in the ribs. He clearly wasn't injured enough yet. Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. Alden's suit was restored to full flexibility as soon as Everly dragged him across one of her ice patches back to the start, but only a few seconds later, he found himself immobilized by an unexpected group hug. He, Max, and Everly were being crushed together between Astrid and Jeffy. "Excuse me, Astrid. Now isn't the time to." "Jeffy, let us." "Really, you two." Max wasn't having much luck getting a word in. The brutes were too busy giving each other blow-by-blow praise for their crimes against Klein. He doesn't seem that annoyed about it, though. Over Astrid's shoulder, Alden could see Fabry rescuing Soren from where he was pressed against the left side barrier by the wind. The Shaper had attacked Winston. People who'd seen it were talking about it. Winston's team was trying to collect him. I can't wait to see that video. Elsewhere on the floor, groups that had reassembled were moving forward. Marcia, Jupiter, and Jerry's team had taken Klein's petrified body with them. Alden wondered if it was strategy to make sure they had as much time as possible without him bothering them, or if the instructor was a trophy. Does he talk, or does he maintain a stony silence while they haul him around? "We do need to go," Max said, more loudly this time. "Or the chance we've bought here will be worthless." Astrid finally heard him. "Yes. We need to run." She let go, freeing Alden and Everly into the camera huddle of their own team. Constantine had brought along the smashed dog crate, and his eyes were closed as he ran his hands over it. He'd said he wanted to try his power out before the end of class, and they had fewer options than they'd had before they'd participated in the attack on the instructor. "Were theirs done for the night?" Alden asked Lexi. "It'll still hurt people if I hit them with it, but they're going to have to stand a lot closer and stiller than usual for me to do that," Lexi said. "Sorry." "And I'm sorry my skill's out," said Alden, looking down at Con. "I know trying one last run to the other side with it was our original. Don't worry about it." Lexi holstered the whip handle and stretched his shoulders. "You paused Klein for a second, and that gave her a chance to make a strong first strike when he broke through." "Nah. Maybe half a second," Alden said. "It definitely wasn't nothing." One of Lexi's shoulders popped loudly. He stopped stretching. He looked surprised before I slashed him. I suppose it could have been Astrid moving and that made him look that way, but I think he didn't know she was coming until she hit him a moment later. He must have been aiming to go through you so fast it took me down, too, but I managed to step back and get Rather to behave more. It's so sweet how mind Rather works better when Con is in trouble, Everly said. It does, doesn't it? I'm not just imagining. You're imagining things, Lexi said. Hoyu looked at the whip. I don't think she is. But we'll review it all tonight in the recovery sauna. Alden noticed Lexi didn't argue about being taken along like he had last time. He must be as ready for a break as I am. Or he liked the fast recovery. Everyone could use it after this. Do you want to come with us, too, Everly? Alden asked. I could get you a guest pass. I was there earlier, and it was busy. But it wasn't quite as crowded as it has been lately. You went to the spa before class? Hoyu exclaimed. No, I mean I was at North of North, not the spa specifically. I was working on something in one of their combat simulation rooms. Lexi, Hoyu, and Everly all looked at him. What? You worked out at the gym before coming to gym? Hoyu asked. It only sounds crazy because you're saying it in that tone, Alden protested. It's really normal behavior, I'm sure. Lexi tilted his head. How often do you do that? What kind of combat simulation? Hoyu added. Do other people do this kind of thing, too? Everly sounded worried. How many hours a day are you? She was interrupted by Con clearing his throat and deepening his voice to announce, the time has come. I'm now prepared to save you all. Lexi's eyes went toward the ceiling. Are we sure we want to use our Klein free run like this? Your whip is tired. Alden's skill is gone. My spell impression casts are gone except for the currently active one, and in hindsight, I shouldn't have hit my parents quite so many times with boxing gloves. Since Everly doesn't want to ice over the entire gym and carry us all on her back, don't put words in my mouth, said Everly. I'd be willing to try it. Oh. Never mind. If she's game, then we don't need Con for any. Con held up his hand. All passengers, this is your captain speaking. Flight number 1 on air. Con will be leaving shortly. Please stuff your insults in the overhead bins and tie the body parts of your choice to the steel pancake that Alden and Klein made. Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. The spell on the other side of the red line, the one that had ended Finley and Astridge's sprint to the finish earlier, was probably Shockbox. Con hadn't seen them go down, but after having a chance to think, he'd arrived at this answer. Alden had been figuring out the rules of the game all class, which was clearly part of the challenge they'd been set, so the final hurdle wouldn't be something impossible to discern. It should be a problem teams were capable of predicting with the information they had collected so far. Con could think of a dozen spells an adjuster focusing on electrical effects might have used to quickly and quietly take out a pair of runners. But Mrs. Sethi had been setting traps all class. So it must be a trap, not a spell she's casting directly at people who hit that point. And she's old, so it's most likely Shockbox. That one had been around forever. A classic. Con had given a presentation on various electricity spells at Paragon, about 2 weeks before he was selected. He had compared Shockbox to impressions like Lighting Picket and Thunder Garden. He'd annoyed his teacher by not including more mid and low rank spells. But he'd managed to make everyone in class laugh with every other slide, and he'd gotten full credit for delivering it bilingually. A success. Everly had been in the same class, and she had used her own presentation as an excuse to feed them bingsu. But the thing Con remembered most about that day was how he'd had trouble enjoying it. Becoming a high-rank adjuster with the same focus as Mrs. Sethi, a superhero who controlled lightning like some mythological god, that had been the plan for ages by then. Con had loved it for ages, and then he'd started to have periods when it just seemed so empty. He would have known what to do if he'd had an interest in another class. But he didn't have something else to latch onto at all. Sometimes, the plan still sounded wonderful. At other times, it became a looming obligation he wanted to hit the brakes on. Only that wasn't allowed. You couldn't stop getting older. You couldn't be a flake at 15 as an about, at least not about your class selection. You'd scare your parents. You'd summon worry and intervention from every direction. And you'd heap stress on your unselected brother, who was already the most stressed out person in the country. And, maybe, it wasn't actually a problem. There was a possibility you were just terrified of commitment, and what good was it to let on if that was the case? You had to commit to something and make it work. Con had heard a woman saying that to her teenage daughter in a shop, and he decided to take it as advice for himself. After all, if he walked into a classroom one day, or his home, and announced that he had cold feet about his whole life plan, what did he expect anyone else to do about it? So selection landed on him, and just like he'd always hoped for, and he fanned the sputtering flames of the only thing he had that could be called a dream for his life until it was hot and bright again. And he hoped it lasted. Yes, buy me the nauseatingly expensive class trade I've always wanted. Yes, of course I'm so excited. Yes, let's talk CNH applications. Let's do it all. Adjuster became his. He'd accepted the contract, and he'd been ready to turn himself into the lightning god. When the system asked him if he wanted something brand new instead, Con would go to his grave telling people that taking this utterly unknown adjuster path had been strategy, courage, and his sense of adventure. He was such a happy, lucky guy. What else could have prompted the choice? And it wasn't a lie. He had felt a thrill at the offer. He had wanted something special that would make his family proud, and everyone knew that when the system offered something one of a kind, especially to an S, it usually had some extra sparkle to it. Not that came without risks. But Con had also been looking at that dream that kept flickering out, and in the moment of decision, he'd had less faith in it than he should have. Less faith than he had in an unknown. He'd run toward this new thing like it was a flashing way out sign. Put some of the pressure on the system and the Artomans. Let it be half their fault if he hated his own powers. Basically, I reacted like every adult warned us not to. A sudden decision instead of a careful one. Years of subclass research and talks with other adjusters and spell path planning got zapped away in a second. Of course, reader of records and the revert to reading impression that went with it weren't anything at all like shooting lightning bolts. The best plan Con had was still being a superhero, but his actual abilities no longer matched up with how he'd imagined himself doing that job. Possibly they didn't even allow him to do the job at all. Unless I figure something out. I've started. I can still make everyone proud, be an amazing about, keep it all rolling in a good direction. He would make his spell work for his team and his future. Because it was what he had. Forever. And, he thought while he tied himself to Lexi and Hoyu both for good measure, I still have entirely excessive knowledge about electrical spells like shock box. It's not useless. Even if she's got the shock boxes layered one behind the other or something tricky like that, the spell has a maximum height from the surface it's cast on. So we don't actually have to go through it all. We can go over. How can you look so confident? Lexi grumped. Because I believe in myself. Because I have superhuman powers. Because I'm definitely not the most useless S-rank. I told you to stop reading that weird story, Everly hissed. Nobody thinks you're useless in real life. And because I have been practicing very hard, Con said. Just hold on to me with one arm, Hoyu, and see if you can keep me a little steadier so I can still cast. I'll win this for us. And then Alden will feel bad about inviting everyone except me to a spa night. In just a short span of time, the rabbit had somehow managed to apply so many straps to so many different parts of the squashed crate that even if Con screwed up and accidentally repaired some of the cage instead of relocating it, there was a good chance he would stay tied to the thing by at least a few of the strands. I invited you in my head, Alden said, looking up. I didn't do it out loud because you were using your skill, and I didn't want to distract you. He's so unusual for someone Lexi's age. And so normal for someone who got commended by a general. The kind of enigmatic figure you hope to meet in high school. Con was proud of himself for nudging him toward Lexi. His brother needed more friends. If I win this for us, you have to let me throw a party in your apartment. Con announced. No, Lexi said. Of course. See, said Con, you do think I'm capable. Otherwise you wouldn't be so vehement. By my powers, I hope I'm capable. This was going to be a spectacular embarrassment, immortalized from every angle by the gym drones, if he wasn't. Con Roberts, S-rank adjuster and superhero. The dream was going to feel thrilling again one day. He got flashes of it sometimes, like he had when he'd moved that car on the span. I picked this, he thought, as the reading he'd done of the crate filled his mind. Now I figure out how to make it work. Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. You lit the traitor up, Siren. You did it. Did you hurt yourself, too? You don't seem hurt. You shouted something about light. So Apex. Hold on, let me dodge that kitchen sink. Waker's throwing that last? His sense of humor is the best, isn't it? Soren clung to Fabry, unable to get a word in as they plunged through the wind to rejoin their team. He was stunned. He was happy. He was also perilously close to barfing because being carried by an Aji who was dodging sinks with the instant corner skill was an awful ride. All of a sudden, his face was pointed upside down and then back in the direction he'd just been picked up from. He could see Winston lying stiff on the floor. He was face down, and the scent bag he'd taken was on top of him. Did I kill him or just burn him so badly he can't move? And then the view was gone as Fabry spun again. I'm going to be okay, aren't I? Soren thought. I'm going to be a real about, too. Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. A radiator crashed to the floor beside Winston's head. He couldn't even move his neck to see Rebecca's face. What in the universe was that? She demanded, rolling him over with a bare foot while she still clung to the radiator with her hands. Why'd you attack Soren? Why didn't you go help with Klein? You said you would. Winston's sunglasses were gone. He thought they'd cracked from the heat, and then he hadn't been able to keep them on his face when he fell. Well? Answer me. Everyone's going to think we're all liars because of you. She was gripping his arm with one hand now, holding the radiator with the other, her face close to his. On camera it was going to look bad, especially if the drones got a shot of her clenched jaw and narrowed eyes. Answer me, or I'm leaving you here to make a point to everyone else. I offered Soren the chance to come with us, Winston said, licking his lips. You shouldn't have been offering him anything. You should have been across the gym. You said you'd go as our team rep to fight the instructor. Alden sent us the maps because you said yes. If you weren't going to help with the plan, why didn't you tell me so I could do it myself? I wanted to win. The words were still on his interface. Winning with all of you would have shown, people are going to hate us. She didn't get it. If we'd won, it would have been all right. It would have been perfect. Winners have lots of fans. Being in first would have made my followers. Rebecca's nostrils flared. Do your followers live here? Are they going to school with me? Winston had no choice but to lie there while she yelled. I thought you might be really stupid when you started picking on a guy who hangs out at Matadero with a bunch of wizards. But I assumed it wasn't my problem. Now you've made it my problem. Alden was being crazy that, we're Anacitaron. This is Apex. My dad says if you pass gas on the east side of the crescent, they smell it on the west. These people we're in this gym with. She tried to gesture without letting go of him. These are the people I'll know forever. I'll try to beat any of them, but I'm not going to do it by screwing up a plan we agreed to as a class. Winston swallowed. He felt something like panic. Olive was saying you were nicer than she'd thought. Just a minute ago. She's been wearing that gross sweatband you gave her to encourage you. She didn't think I was nice before? You'd better tell everyone the rest of us had no idea what you were going to do. I just wanted to win. For all of us. I was helping you all. Ha! Who is it who needs help right now? He couldn't answer her. It doesn't look like anyone is winning today, anyway, she said. Nobody's that close. Maybe on Friday. She leaned back a little, moving to pick him up. Winston's eyes had a clear view of the ceiling when 5 people, clinging to each other and some smashed metal thing, rocketed overhead like Galactus's wind had no effect on them. 4 of them were screaming. One of them was chanting a chant that Winston had always thought was too alien and disturbing for someone who was serious about being a celebrity. He sounds like a creepy dolphin. Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. Alden knew he and his teammates were all destined for a gruesome finale. He'd been jerked from his feet by the dog crate so violently that he had webbing and paracord digging in everywhere, and the crate had unexpectedly flipped over right at the start. So there was just no chance everyone was going to end up together and in one piece, and he was sure he was screaming, which was the only reasonable reaction for a person to have under these conditions. Suddenly, his stomach proved it hadn't been left behind at the starting line after all. It plummeted as their rapid journey up and across the gym turned into a fall straight down from nearly ceiling height. They kind of slowed down, but not enough for him to wonder if it was evidence of Con having some control, before he was landing in a pile of human limbs. A lot of his body parts hurt for a couple of seconds before the gym let up. That wasn't fun, said Everly. Alden thought that was her leg on top of his neck. He was too disoriented to try to move out from under it. I did not like that. Not at all. Hoyu was laughing somewhere under Alden, but it sounded more like nerves than joy. I can barely move, Lexi breathed. Yeah. Did we win? Con shouted. He was tangled up with Lexi, Hoyu, and the metal, but he was already trying to wiggle out from under them. A large, smiling face appeared in Alden's line of sight. Hi there, Big Snake. Did we win? Con said again. Did I do it? If you're all alive, a healer could probably fix you, said Instructor Waker. I think we could count that. So, are y'all alive? Hoyu responded after several seconds. I'm cool. Yes, we know, Alden said automatically, but are you dead? Hoyu's laugh was real this time. Ah, that just came out so naturally. Like joking around with Bo. I'm cool and alive, said Hoyu. Me too. Con said. I can't move my arms or my legs, but I seem to be alive. Lexi sounded shocked. I think. I'm not even hurt much. Thank you for breaking my fall, Lexi, said Everly. And I'm alive, said Alden. Feels great to say that. Then it sounds to me like you've won. Big Snake clapped his hands together. Thanks for helping me test out one of my wall pet crates. Looks like I should buy a tougher model. He winked at them. Their suits relaxed. Once he'd made it to his own feet, Alden helped the others get untangled, and then they all stood there, meeting each other's eyes and letting it sink in. Lexi looked over at his brother. You did a good job. Soren's shaping might have been the brightest thing to happen in the MPE gym that evening, but Constantine's smile was a close second. Chapter 198 Torsten, I want to thank you for warning me about the dangers of the Mind Wither. I didn't let it kill me, as you advised. Aparna, grinning, held the unitard she'd been wearing over an arm as she followed Torsten to the cleaning cabinets in one corner of the MPE faculty lounge. What's this? Morrison Waker, in little snake form, swiped away the footage he'd been viewing. Did Ruther get a special mention when you were all having fun without me earlier? He just mentioned that it was capable of moving very quickly and unpredictably, Hale said from her seat at the small table across from Morrison. She looked toward her husband, who was flipping through a magazine that had coffee rings from at least 2 different cups on the cover. He was concerned it might catch us by surprise. I wasn't caught by surprise, were you? No. Thanks to the warning, I was on my guard against that dangerous Meister. Scary student, you have there. He paused. Lexi could even kill an instructor with that thing. The Jangdamir's straight faces fell apart as soon as Morrison guffawed. Aparna was cackling while she hung up the cuffs that went with the suit. I don't suppose it would help my cause to point out that there were a few more students than Lexi involved. That's right, said Aparna. So many students united for a common goal, willing to sacrifice themselves. What horrors do you commit during your regular classes to provoke such a response? There was so much cheering when he died, wasn't there? The smiles on their young faces. Pure delight. The way the girl with the spear stabbed you a couple of extra times to make sure you were really gone. Can't be too cautious when you're facing true evil. Torsten shut the cabinet door. They did well for what was more of a time pile-on than a coordinated assault. Maybe it was coordinated. Kids could have been planning it all, period. Torsten's eyes crinkled at the corners. Good point. We should have all the participants submit write-ups on it, so we'll know exactly what they were thinking. Not a bad idea. Wait, I'm reading all the written work this week. I do seem to recall that, Torsten said. Now that you mention it. Assigning homework to punish your students and your fellow instructors, said Aparna. I am no longer surprised those girls were bold enough to carry you to one of my shock boxes and throw you in. Torsten blinked. I think they were hoping a body would spring the trap and let them cross. I'm sure that's the excuse they'll use in their homework. Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. The volunteers had left, the gym had been cleared for the next users, and replacements for damaged elemental weights had been added to the daily inventory request list, when the two instructors finally left the building together. Torsten stopped on the way out to hold the door for a group of 4 teenagers. The two of them who were still in school uniforms at this late hour wore third-year pins on their jackets. Ready for your graduation tests? He asked them. 2 of them said no in laughing tones. 1 said yes. A short girl with a Webtoon tattooed on her arm shook her head. I still have 1 more quarter to go, instructor. You just missed Gala course, Torsten said. She was here? She'll be back on Friday. And she is on our list of volunteers who are offering one-on-one lessons. You've heard about that? She's only donating a few hours, but I thought you'd like to know. I'm aware you're a fan. The students headed inside, the girl groaning about her chances of earning a slot with Gala course before someone else snapped it up, and Torsten let the door close behind them. Melanie did take off in a hurry, said Morrison. Wanted to get some quality time in with Vandy, maybe. I don't see how her mom and dad manage harrowing for 2 cities each and parenting here on Anzidora. I think her grandparents are very involved. Morrison, have you got a good read on Alden Thorne's skill? Can't say I do. But I like the ones that take a little more figuring out. Torsten slid his hands into the pockets of the coat he wore over his button-down shirt. It was more resistance than I was expecting from him, especially at the end of class. Think there's a clue there about what makes the skill tick? Or what makes the user tick along with it? Possibly. It was just worth noting. They walked down a lamplit pathway, heading toward the nearby street that marked the edge of campus. A stiff breeze tousled Morrison's shaggy hair. Torsten said, I admit I have a preference for the more familiar or obvious abilities. Many students who receive my advice about which talents to affix seem to think I'm on a mission to make them boring. It's challenging to explain to a teenager that boring strengths aren't going to seem boring at all when you actually need to use them. The list of options the system provides contain and discover trinkets and traps in addition to hidden treasures. Every year we uncover more of the latter, we negotiate with the true planets for improvements, and we learn how to use what we already have better. Why be the first through the gate at 16? If the skill that's tempting you is good, if the spell is world-changing, you'll hear about it one day and you can make acquiring it your goal then. You definitely can't apply that to the first choice, though, Morrison said. Look at Khan. Look at Soren. Look at Alden giving you a little surprise. Great class today, wasn't it? I'm happy to see them finding themselves, recovering from the ordeal of the past days, and losing the tensions the obstacle course brought out. Some of the tensions. What exactly did Winston do to infuriate Soren? Guess you missed it while you were occupied. I'll give you a rundown of what I saw. Rebecca gave a speech that was even more illuminating if you want the full picture. Torsten sighed. So weary. Come with me. I know a place that'll knock the worst parts of the day off us both. I should. Come on. We don't spend enough time together outside of work, do we? I'll tell you about some of my funnier moments that the PR people hid from the public. Ha! There. You look tempted. I guess I could spare some time. This way. Morrison turned down the street. I do see your point about the mystery talents, but I think some people thrive on the idea of trailblazing, Too often trailblazers end up blazing their way into trouble or rushing down no path at all, Torsten replied. Anyway, let's ask Alden if he knows yet how different kinds of attacks affect his time to skill fatigue. We might find something there. I have a lot of thinking to do about several of the students. Soren's going to need more help. For now, let's leave work at work. Sure, you're not just afraid I'm going to bring up the fact that the kids banded together to attack Y. You promised me stories about your own errors. Fair enough. Second year on the job in Houston. I'm feeling unbeatable, and then this little old object shaper comes along and hoists me up by my blue jeans. They entered North of North together, and only a few short minutes later, Torsten's eyes were boring holes into Morrison as they stood outside the recovery sauna. I swear I didn't know, Morrison whispered, looking through the glass door. One of them just happens to be the student who killed me earlier, Torsten said dryly. These kids have more expensive after-school habits than I did when I was their age. Come on before they see us if you don't want to sit with. They are waving, Torsten said darkly. Wave back and keep walking? Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. Hoyu, they leave. But we waved. Lexi, they probably have other plans. Hoyu, stop using fingers. Moo. Between them, Alden laughed softly then went back to watching Soren fry Winston. Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. I can't believe Con and Everly didn't come with us, Hoyu said a while later. The three roommates had missed their dining window at the school cafeteria, which hadn't gone back to the original schedule on convenient drone deliveries yet, so they'd opted for free smoothies and expensive salads here at North of North. Sharing a table beside the smoothie bar and listening to the blenders they chewed on mixed greens artfully sprinkled with a medley of health food. Hoyu slurped on a chocolate peanut butter drink while he talked. What could be better than a recovery sauna homework experience with the three of us? Con even complained about not being invited. The salad on the table in front of Alden was disappearing at a shocking rate. The combo of gym and recovery sauna always made him ravenous. He only had a few more walnuts and arugula leaves to go, and he was considering ordering another. And then they said no thanks. They wanted a rain check. I say we don't give them one, Hoyu said. How are you going to threaten me with Con if he won't do things with you? Lexi looked smug. Don't worry. I'll threaten to let him in our room. He'll always go for that. Lexi reached for his own smoothie, which was so full of kale powder that it was the color of grass, but he paused before sipping on it. There's supposed to be rain in half an hour. Do you need to fly to the place you've been going sometimes, Alden? Tonight? That could be hard. Surprised by the concern, and a little touched, Alden swallowed his last walnut and shook his head. I'm at the dorms tonight. Did you check the weather for me? I thought I heard thunder while we were leaving the showers, so I looked. It would suck to fly across the ocean in a storm, so thanks for that. Are you done going there so much? Or not? Alden sat back, his own raspberry smoothie cold in his hand. He didn't really think Lexi, Mr. Keep Your Weirdness to Yourself, was being nosy. He probably just wants fewer surprises. Like the whole island suddenly delivering Thanksgiving food to our apartment. Or like me and Hoyu suddenly delivering a night to our apartment. It's been a busy week, said Alden. You're a good roommate. Lexi froze. Hoyu started sniggering. Why are you saying that? Lexi asked. Saying what? What's going to happen? Nothing. It was a compliment. Gratitude. I was being grateful to you. Before he could explain himself more, Hoyu lost it and blew smoothie out of his nose. Lexi and Alden both stared at him while he tried to clean himself and the table with napkins. Ugh. I'm sorry. Why did you keep drinking while you laughed? Asked Lexi. It tasted good. Gross, it's on my salad. Did I get any on yours? I'll buy you another. It's fine. Don't wipe so hard. You're a brute. You'll damage the table. Alden grabbed some napkins, but they had it cleaned up before he could help. To answer your question, he said, as he took his seat again, I'll be going there sometimes. A few more trips at least. Explaining out loud wasn't his preference, but he did think the two of them had earned an explanation beyond what he'd given them so far. Alden, I have an open invitation to go to Matadero, while Escherty's in residence. He thinks there's nothing strange about giving me access to the cube. I'm visiting a couple of people there when I can, and I'm teleporting from there to the Triplanets sometimes. To see my friend and a healer. He shrugged. I also still have to get a snake back from Escherty's room. I heard the way he talked about that, said Hoyu. He's making friends with it. I think you'll have to fight him for it. In that case, I will not be getting the snake back. Smart rabbit. Choose life. Alden was glad Hoyu had gotten to know Escherty a little. I'll be sleeping at the dorms tonight and probably tomorrow night. 2 perfectly ordinary school days in a row. When you say that, I feel like you're jinxing yourself. And us, Lexi muttered. I'm not. This has been one of the least ordinary months of my life. That's not Alden's fault, Hoyu pointed out. Most of the stuff that's gone wrong has been because of the flood. I obviously should have thrown more coins into the mall fountain for luck after our class dinner. Has your family been doing all right? Alden asked Lexi. I can take you to see them again whenever. They're fine. The ferry is nice, but if I need your nine-edged son whose own mother forsakes him, Alden said. Yes. That. Him? I'll ask. They spent the rest of their meal discussing class, what they would do on Friday, whether or not they wanted to try to schedule a planning meeting tomorrow with Con and Everly, if they ought to swap teams. I think our roles would be similar on any good team. Hoyu was giving his empty cup a disappointed look. If I was on a team with 3 or 4 weak members. You know what I mean. Not weak, but weak at this. In that situation, I'd have more work to do, but I didn't feel like our performance was so good today that there was nothing to improve within our own team. So I think it would be better, for me, to run it with you guys again. There's also the fact that we've all won one now, and nobody else has, Alden said. If we're all together, it's fine to try out some crazier stuff even on early runs, but other teams are going to be more focused on perfecting the strategies they had at the end of class today. They'll be more risk-averse? I would think so anyway. You want to do something crazier than attacking Instructor Klein and then flying over the finish line strapped to some garbage? Lexi asked. Not for the purpose of being crazy. But I wouldn't mind making some less obvious choices. Trying to catch Instructor Waker's throws, helping Everly make a nice road. She seriously wanted to try that. I thought she was kidding, said Hoyu. We can also let Con get kidnapped instead of you, and then he can bring himself back to us really fast. All he needs is a harness or something. He'll definitely die. Lexi sounded grim. That's what the gym is for, Hoyu said. And if you two are on the same team, Ruther will work even better. Sometimes. Don't glare. We all know what we saw. So all of us will do it together again unless Everly and Con make other plans. Alden was satisfied with that. Do you two know who you want to have a personal training session with yet? Hoyu asked. They had already looked at the list. Con had been enthusing over the names on it by the time they made it into the MPE locker room. The selection of volunteers was impressive. Many famous alumni were back on Anzidora, either because they had personal matters to deal with after the floods or because they'd been called in to assist. And there were plenty of unfamiliar names, too. Their class wasn't the very first to have access to the volunteers. That was obvious because some slots were already taken. But their team was among the first to choose from the looks of it, and Alden was glad for that. He was aiming for a narrow range of time slots. He wanted to get the extra practice in soon, not sometime during the December break when most of the sessions would be held. And he needed to dodge not only his own class schedule, but also Stuart's free time schedule. If the primary's son was available to shoot spells at him and provide information, Alden didn't want to be here on Earth trying to explain what a backup was to a teacher instead. And he'd obviously need to leave plenty of time for the next appointment with Yenupesth, enough to allow for whatever mood he'd be in after steeping on the inward path. His first appointment had ended up keeping him on Ortona I for a whole extra day. Sometimes after mind healing, you had epiphanies about your corrupted moon's survival capabilities. Such things had to be accounted for. I'm thinking of choosing Rose Ofori. I don't know much about her, but she has a weapon that phases like Rither. Getting advice on that specifically might be helpful. I thought about choosing Principal Sleyca because she phases, said Alden. Lexi looked surprised. I like that she is unpredictable. And I don't know how her abilities would work against my shield, Alden explained. Gaston had a famously mercurial fighting style, which would feel like practicing against something chaotic, maybe. But then I realized all of these trained high ranks are going to be unpredictable enough for my level of amateur, so I'm probably going to request Instructor Waker. Tomorrow night at 10. All of the slots available between now and break were on weekends or at painful hours. So fast, said Hoyu. It's going to take me the rest of the week to decide. There are too many to pick from. If you wait, you'll have the opposite problem, Lexi warned. They must be offering this as a prize in all the gym classes. I'm sure they want as many students as possible to take advantage of it. He scooted his chair back and reached for the black backpack he'd left under the table. Let's go before it starts raining. They left and were soon crossing the street with a uni girl who was humming a song that could have been either Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star or Stinky, Stinky, Go Karach. As the first drops of rain fell, they passed through the sliding doors into their dormitory and were greeted by warm air, the smell of garlic from whatever the last cooking endeavor in the community kitchen had been, and a rowdy group of guys who were playing a game that involved putting a t-shirt on as fast as possible, then taking it off again to pass it to the next person. Two teams were racing, and judging by the pile of shredded fabric under one of the chairs, part of the challenge was striking a balance between dressing yourself at super speed without going too far and ripping your team's shirt like tissue paper. That looks like fun. Hoyu was moving his arms as if he were imagining himself doing it. Lexi's mouth tightened, and he turned to head up the stairs. Alden just assumed he disapproved of wasting perfectly good shirts until Hoyu spoke up as they climbed toward the second floor. Never mind. Garci was down there. That automatically makes the game less fun. You don't have to do that, Lexi said. Who's Garci? Alden asked. The really ugly one, Hoyu said. Lexi let out a tiny laugh that made Alden think Hoyu was probably joking. He hadn't noticed anyone downstairs who looked remarkably below average. Just a former classmate, said Lexi. We spent a lot of time together in his last year at Paragon because we both wanted to be Meisters. Then, we didn't spend time together anymore. Oh, said Alden. He got S and turned into an S-hole overnight, said Hoyu. As the week will do. S-hole is a new one for me. It is? I should have said Nzidor's social dynamic first. If you get S, and suddenly you're too important for your old friends, you're an S-hole. Lexi looked at them. Why are you two having this conversation out loud? You usually use mental texting for talking behind people's backs, don't you? Some people deserve to be talked about out loud, Hoyu announced. Do you guys mind if my parents come over after class on Friday? For dinner. I want to cook something for them, and Mom's going to be gone for a while next month. Of course I don't mind, said Alden. By the way, I wash dishes magically now. And they come out definitely, mostly clean enough to eat off of. That's so unexpectedly rabid of you. Hoyu sprang ahead of Lexi so that he could open the door. It had just shut behind them, and they were sliding off their shoes, when a splashing sound made Alden and Hoyu pause. Lexi exhaled sharply, and stalked toward the bathroom, dropping his backpack on the kitchen table along the way. Alden and Hoyu followed a few steps behind. Con! Lexi yelled, throwing open the bathroom door. I don't care if your room came with an extra toilet instead of a tub. Alden heard the curtain around the tub being yanked aside. That doesn't mean you can help yourself to fuck. Greater than sorry. The Meister leaped backward out of the bathroom, almost into the two of them. Good evening, Lexi, called a familiar voice. Come in. Open the curtain and glare down at me while I eat ramen in the tub. That won't be uncomfortable for either of us. Loot. said Alden. Then nutmeg. Hoyu exclaimed. You're back. There was another splash and a slurping sound. Don't tell people I'm back. I'm cutting class until at least Monday. I just couldn't eat another bite of Wevy. I saw one coming, and I thought I'd take my chances here in my homeland, which my family almost destroyed. Did destroy. A significant portion of it is destroyed. Did you guys know that the disposable ramen bowls float? Line of asterisks. Alden was in his pajamas on the sofa by the time Loot finished his bath and came into the living room in his robe. His hair was brown. It did nothing to disguise his appearance. Nobody came by and asked for me over the past few days, did they? Luke wandered over to study the bromeliad while Hoyu flicked water on it from a cup. Nobody mentioned me ruining anything during the floods. Nobody in their right mind thinks you were involved with Sile or the submerger or any of it, Alden said, adjusting his tablet screen's brightness. I meant more like damage to a specific section of highway, a lamppost, some of the span. And that railing Cyril had belted himself to. An offense that was impeding access to a place it really shouldn't have been impeding access to during a crisis, you know? Hoyu stopped sprinkling his plant. Did you break a bunch of stuff saving your father? Luke looked thoughtful. If a person just bumps into something or hops off of it, and damage occurs, did the person really break the object? Or did the object fail to do its job? It's the first one, said Hoyu. Yeah, it is, Alden agreed. I should ask Lexi when he gets in here. What are you guys doing tonight? Homework, then sleep. Watching the first episode of Coolpack, and then sleeping off the side effects of my body becomes my assistant's greater than worse half. Lexi came down the hall with Rather in one hand and a notebook in the other. He held them both up as if that was enough of an answer. We're all together, said Hoyu. The island is healing. Luke watched him for a second. Why don't you just carry the plant to the shower and miss it? Hoyu paused with his fingers in the water glass, then he flicked them in Luke's face. Alden smiled at the sounds of the two of them playing around, and at Lexi sighing as he took his preferred armchair. Then, he put on his headphones and watched the good child Klepak travel with his parents to a seminarium for the first time, on his way to meet his older, more experienced cousin Ku. Tobe continued,